Hey guys, Rafe here from Evolve Move Play, with a little micro podcast. We're just at the end of a beautiful camp, week-long camp in Massachusetts called the Movement Orienteering and Body Intelligence Camp. I'm with Tom Weksler. We were coaching together, as well as Aaron Cantor, Shiri Aziv, and Nuria Boart. So Tom has a background in capoeira, gymnastics, strength, and most extensively modern dance. I got the chance to train with him in February of 2014. It was a really influential seminar for me, something I really enjoyed, and so I was very excited to see Tom again and get to kind of hear from him. So you call your work movement archery, and I was just curious to have you kind of tell the audience what that means to you, why you chose that name, and where you're going with that.
Well, first of all, I needed a name. And it sounds good, for me at least. My idea today as a professional dancer, I always feel a bit of an outsider. Because of the necessity to justify every movement, practice, or research that I do to stage, which means what will not eventually be beneficial for stage is not relevant for most professional dancers. And since, as you said, my background is in acrobatics and in martial arts and in other forms of movement, I felt that it's very important for me to kind of represent the idea that not necessarily for every target there's a specific solution. And this is why the archery is a very inspiring imagery for me, because in order to hit a target, you choose an arrow. You don't not necessarily choose this or that arrow. So this is on the imagination level what I was thinking about. For me to go to the stage and be good at what I do, I also need to be happy, I also need to be healthy, I also need to be inspired. And this is not the things that usually will be the most relevant for a choreographer or for a creator. And I would like to pull them still for this target because I think they're supporting the mission. So I hope, it's very abstract in a way, but I hope it makes sense. So I'm pulling this type of movement, that type of movement, this idea or that idea. And I think this is where the image came from. Aside from that, I was very inspired by a book that's called Zen and the Art of Archery by Eugen Herrigel, which is a German guy that done some Zen training and archery training in Japan. And he wrote a very short book. It's about 60 or 70 pages. Did you read this book?
I haven't read it yet.
I recommend it. It's nice. I mean,
I'll read
it. His experience with archery and his paradigm shift as a Westerner, as European, as an intellectual. He's teaching in a university in Tokyo, I think, by the time he's staying in Japan. Going into a physical training with Zen training, all the conflicts he has to go through and all the obstacles he has to overcome was all very inspiring for me. When I try to kind of vision what I want to do with movement. So these two things.
Nice. So you're a professional dancer by profession, at least mostly, right?
Mostly, yeah.
Now a teacher as well.
Yes.
And so you conceive of movement now from that perspective, is what it sounds like.
Well, I think that I chose dance more than I chose to be a professional dancer. I really think that dance has something which is very truthful on many different layers. It's a practice that is very primal. It's something you can identify with. And I think it was very important on an evolutionary level, like communication and not to mention different times in history. It represented so many interesting things, hierarchy and different status was also accompanied by knowing this or that dance. it's very interesting practice that has a lot of layers into it. And today, being someone that just performs dance on stage has not so much potential for me. The practice has tremendous amount of potential. The profession, not so much. This is why, aside from teaching, I also teach. Aside from performing, I also teach, and I also try to hold some kind of research projects, which not necessarily go to stage, which has different targets. Understanding how an expression can benefit or support this or that type of movement, this or that type of athleticism, this or that type of mindset, and so on and so on. But also, at some level, in order to have continuity and to earn the proper challenges, I'm still working as a performer for other creators. I'm still creating stage works, because if I will not, I'm not ready yet to leave this completely.
Yeah, I understand that as someone who was very devoted to parkour, and at one point was really wanting to compete in what were kind of coming up as the parkour competitions, and then trying to build this movement method and model. I ended up having to go away from the competitions. I can't do both. But it'd be really cool to have the space to do what you're doing and dig deeply into the performance aspect. I think there's a lot for the teacher to learn from performance and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, competition is a very tricky thing, I think, and performance, as the way it's grasped in the modern society, is unfortunately very connected to competition. I think, for example, the parkour competitions has been something very interesting at the beginning. And then later it became a bit too efficient towards the competition, which means the effectiveness as parkour athletes decreased. It becomes so specific that actually the magic is gone.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because when you create a competitive format, and this is something that I was thinking about when we first started doing this, as soon as there is a specific framework that people can train to, they're going to narrow their training in order to be the best athlete for that framework. And that's kind of precisely against the idea of being this broad, globally competent person that parkour was originally about. When I think about competing in indoor competitions, aside from the fact that I can't really have availability most times that they're happening, I think, well, I'd really want to compete. I'd really need to train myself to do the specific things in the specific environments to have the best chance to do well. And that's really contrary to what I want. I don't want to be in a gym training for a competition. I want to be out in nature training for research.
And I think research connects to art much more than competition. And for me, things get artistic when the way means more than the result. Now, it doesn't mean by any. I do not mean that there's no necessity for a practice that is very directed towards a specific result. I think, for example, one of the problems of contemporary dance today is lack of specific results. And then you see people who have a training which doesn't lead anywhere, doesn't lead to any craftsmanship, doesn't lead to any skill. On the other hand, when you deal with art, there is the place of looking for the result, and there is the place to look for the research, and they should not interfere with each other. A very inspiring example for me, and I said sometimes in my workshop, I probably said I heard it is Hickson Gracie. Which the way he perceived himself and his training was very much as an artist. A lot of research, a lot of checking here, checking there. People who followed him, know that He competed in many forms of martial arts for the sake of research. He took things from sambo, from shoot boxing, from wrestling.
Shoe wrestling. Yeah.
Judo wrestling, Japanese judo wrestling, from judo, from a variety of places, for the sake of research. And all the time he said that also that his inspiration was not an athletic inspiration. It was nature, it was animals, it was understanding, his potential, the potential of his mind, the potential of his body, not necessarily to be the best or to form a system that is the best system.
Yeah.
So I think that people get confused too easily, like you said with the parkour competitions. If it's there for the sake of understanding yourself better, for finding new challenges, for stepping out of the comfort zone, is a good thing. But if it becomes the target, I do parkour for competing, it means that the art is lost, basically. So.
Yeah, this is a very interesting tension between the practice and the goal. When I went to train with you the first time, on the first day I asked you, what was the goal of the practice of movement archery? You remember what you said?
Absolutely not.
You said there is no goal.
Sounds familiar.
So there is no goal. I think you said something poetically dismissive on top of that, but it was basically like, don't come to the work with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the last day, you said something a little bit more about what you gain from the practice is what you're going for. And this is something that has been a big kind of epiphany for me, and thing that I have been working on is I set out with many goals to be maybe a great competitive parkour athlete, or to be the best generalist mover with the planche and the 500-pound deadlift and the one-arm handstand. And I kept getting distracted along the way, researching things that were more joyful for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then it ended up being that those things were places where I was able to develop unique visions that I was able to share with people.
Moving to the States, I remember that I had a similar mindset to what I have today. What is interesting, okay, what can benefit me on a physical level, on a mind level, and then finding that thing and practice it fully. But coming to the States, where all of a sudden I encountered that kids' sports had much more money, had much more ambition. All of a sudden I'm playing basketball in high school, and kids are injecting steroids, and at 16 or something, and not to mention parents putting money on private classes, but really things that I felt that it's tools that I don't have, but we're still playing the same game. And I remember starting to ask these questions, but then, what do you get out of it? If you need to take steroids and putting money that no one else has, in order to play a game, it actually puts us in an equal place. You understand a bit where I'm going with this? So I realized that the whole concept of having a target or winning at something today in our society, modern society, is completely twisted. It's like we want to get it by all means necessary, and not we want to become better person while getting it. And it was funny because I remember this realization actually made me better at anything I did at that time. It's like all of a sudden I was like, okay, I'm not so interested at being the best, and somehow I became much better. So I think it was like kind of the first touch of understanding that the process of becoming better at a skill is happening on many levels, not just on the level of actually getting better or getting the coordination better, but also on the level of understanding better what are the components that trigger things, and maybe more important, what can be left out while keeping the initial trigger. So if I enjoy basketball and I enjoy the challenge of basketball, basically I can forget about the career I want to make out of it. It's not relevant for my progression. It's not relevant. And not only that, is that it will maybe also the understanding that will drift off things that will cause me actually to lose fun, to lose my health, to lose time that I don't need to lose, and I can invest in other things and so on. So I think this was the first point, this like understanding that there's places that no matter how badly or hard I will compete, I will not manage to win. And understanding this actually made me more of a winner somehow.
Yeah, this makes sense to me. I think that that was a realization that came a lot later for me. So good job. I've heard this phrase as outcome independence, that like to really fully engage in a process and to be the most effective at it, you actually have to some degree, be able to let go of where it goes. And I think this ties into concepts we've talked about over the week of wu wei or mushinoshin, of being able to empty your mind and act. And these are incredibly powerful places for truly being effective at anything that you want to do. And this ties into something that I wanted to talk to you about, which I thought was really interesting, which is the minimalism that you bring to your coaching style. You talked about how part of letting go of the outcome and focusing on the practice for you is about learning to get rid of the stuff that's not necessary. And I've heard you talk about this week, like this idea of minimalism quite a lot. And it was something that I noted when I went to train with you. I'm a very verbal guy and really good with words, and I really like very specific stories and kind of structures and things. And I was really curious when I went to train with you, kind of how your approach to teaching would be. And the first time that I taught with you, you were really very clearly sort of intentionally not talking a lot of the time. You were leaving a lot of space, and I was sort of curious. I was like open-minded about it, but it was really outside of the scope of how I would normally teach or how the people that I respected taught. And so I kind of went through the process, and the interesting thing that happened was that I really tapped into things that I didn't expect to during the course of the workshop, and was able to move with rhythm much better than I expected, and to kind of unlock some of the acrobatic skills that were hard for me. They came very easily all of a sudden. And so I was curious about your philosophy on that, and why you place so much emphasis on the idea of, and how it works with your coaching, to place so much emphasis on not giving too much.
Well, I mean, the best answer to this question and to this idea would be not to answer. And let's say, but no, I think it's first of all my choice in engaging and dedicating my life to dance, to martial arts, to acrobatics, based on the idea that I feel more comfortable communicating with expressions of my body than expression of my words, of my vocabulary. And this is something that I all the time go back to. I mean, in school I remember myself being quite okay with managing tasks, written tasks, and I love reading. I read a lot, but I feel better. I feel more honest when I express my body, and not my words. I feel, like you say, it's tapping into a different level of communication, which I feel more authentic at. This is the first thing. Second thing, which is a bit more connected to the teaching, is that I've been in the past 2 years, I spent a lot of time in Japan, and I learned in Japan a concept which is called Wabi-Sabi. I don't know if you ever heard about it. It's basically an aesthetic concept that is kind of connected to aesthetics of Zen artists. It's funny because it's one of the things that when you try to understand, any Japanese person knows about Wabi-Sabi, And if you will ask him, is it this thing or that thing, he will always tell you, no, you don't understand. Regardless if it's like a person that is more, modern, ancient, young, old, always use the foreigner, you don't understand. This is what really pulled me about it. And it's basically connected to two words, which one of them means the ability of something to get old naturally, and one of them more connects to the ability of something to be, let's say, formed naturally. Okay? To give you an example, usually if you look at ceramics, Western ceramics, like a bowl, cereal bowl, once it's a little bit broken or a bit, or getting a bit of mold, it's not useful, and it's not pretty.
Yeah.
It loses the beauty and it loses the function. Mm-hmm. And then if you would look into some of the Japanese art, it gets a bit broken, it gets a bit molded, it gets a bit, and it's still beautiful, and you can still eat off of it.
Yeah.
It's a bit hard to imagine, maybe if you don't have something, but the idea of, for example, carving something from wood, but not completely giving the wood a new look.
Yeah.
Like that, your hand didn't manipulate it so much. Okay, so you have the kind of the nature of the material, and you also, it's in a shape that if something happens, it still has life. Another great example of the Wabi-Sabi is that when they fix something with kind of golden or silver patterns, so you see sometimes broken balls with like the part that is broken, made from really beautiful material. How does it connect to? I feel that many of the things that I suggest, if I put too many words, it's like I'm manipulating the result. And many times I want to give something, and of course, you be in the workshop, I try to give a structure that is clear and is demanding and is challenging. But I don't want to manipulate what will happen from the person coming into the structure. And for me, too many words is like carving the plate a bit too many times. Okay, so I will get to the perfect shape, but I will lose the possibility for the thing to get a bit broken, or to get a bit old, or to have the natural flavor.
Yeah.
So this kind of concept of Wabi-Sabi is something that I've been thinking a lot about and trying to work a lot while comparing my teaching and my practice to it. Asking, can someone who is very old do my class? Can someone who is very young do my class at the same time? And can I give a structure that will fit both? So this a bit connects, and always somehow, the more I go into it, every time I go back to the quiet. The quiet is my tool for manifesting all of these ideas.
It's very interesting because, I came from, when I was driving down to take your seminar, I was talking with my students who were coming with me about this distinction between a classical pedagogy and a romantic pedagogy that Frank Furnansich has kind of popularized. And the basic idea is the classical pedagogy is very analytical, very technical, very kind of, this is exactly what you need to do. And the romantic pedagogy is more experiential. And I had just moved from really training mostly parkour to also like studying some modern dance. And the experience of studying modern dance was totally difficult for me because the pedagogy was so romantic. This idea of giving things the space to develop, kind of within themselves, I think it's very powerful. And it's interesting because, my work, as I was giving people more space and more freedom and giving them more a set of tasks and letting them develop within that, I was hearing feedback from my students about how they were really enjoying it. And also some of them who were very highly educated people were saying, hey, you need to check out dynamic systems theory. This is what it reflects. and so I've gone in that direction and researched that, and then working with you and also Shira, I saw kind of this other take on it, which seems to come from dance and also from martial arts, like as you mentioned, Zen, and I've been reading a little bit more about Taoism and some of these traditional philosophies. It's interesting how all these ideas kind of reflect each other, and you see these same patterns. So yeah, it's really inspiring.
I think the martial arts is also, it's a great tool for realization of this type of principles.
Yeah.
And another experience that is strong for me in Japan is that the past 3 years I've been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And because I spent so much time in Japan, the place when I trained mostly was in an academy called, in a school called the Axis Tokyo, or Axis headquarters. And it's basically a school that was opened by all by Hickson Gracie students. Okay. And Axis Tokyo is being run by a guy called Takamase Watanabe Sensei. That he's one of the first of Hickson black belts, if I remember correctly. And when I started training in Japan, it was already after, because of the nature of my work, I've been training also in Europe and in the States, and I already had some kind of preconceived image of what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is, and what martial arts is in general, And again, I was looking for something very specific, and a lot of words: gi, no gi, competition training, self-defense training. And we go to Axis Tokyo and you see this. It's amazing academy, beautiful, super clean. People are super welcoming. And I go there, I look at the schedule, and I see there's only trainings. And I ask, I'm coming with. Wait, what about the no gi? What about the gi? What about the this? No, we do gi trainings. Like 3 times a day. So already something. I'm trying to ask, but why? What about? It works for us. It's like. Anyhow, when starting to train more, I realized it's not by whatsoever anything that pretend to be some kind of Zen or old tradition, the place. But you see that they run the academy by principles of being kind, being clean, being honest, not being aggressive, and they have amazing results. They have amazing guys winning competitions. Amazing level of technique. It's like you go there, you see so many martial arts tourists there always, and you see that the teaching, what it felt to me so many times was that it's always teaching without ego, and this was something that I was like kind of aspire to do something like this, but I never saw it being technically run so well. And I remember one of my, I got also a bit closer to all the teachers there have some connection to Brazil, and because of my capoeira, we all became kind of good friends. And I remember one time that they were always helping me a lot with techniques, and so on. And I remember one time that one of the biggest disappointments, one of the teachers was that I was not being kind to beginners. It's something that is very hard to teach. It's how to be kind to beginners. It's like I cannot give you a formula what is. But I remember, I'm coming in. New white belts are coming in, and coming them and submitting them multiple times. I remember that this was the only moment I felt like kind of felt disappointment from the teachers, from the instructors, that like here you mess up, and it's not mess up because it's not mess up which were our usual mess up. You messed up in competition, you messed up to show on time, you messed up to show respect, you messed up but not being kind to the person who needs kindness, and this was again, mind blowing. And later on also when I started getting, going further and getting, colored belts, all of a sudden I'm rolling with people who were my friends. At the beginning, I felt that I was like kind of, we're always having like good times, and I was always stepping up my game and succeeding to roll with them, at the same level. And then getting new belts, all of a sudden, they're like, when I actually came to their level, they're like, okay, now they destroyed me,
Yeah.
So actually holding back for so long without saying anything about it, like without saying, I will show you, which is something we like to do as a Westerner. I have the knowledge, so I will show you. No, they're just there and they're just being kind, quietly kind, so I can develop without anyone manipulating it, and
Yeah.
this kind of idea of letting something, like you said, you put people on the tree, and I felt it in your class as well this week.
Yeah.
You put someone on the tree and you give him something. You have him, the tree, and something technical, This is enough to create a huge structure and huge potential for growth. While what we tend to do sometimes is, after giving these things which are enough for really amazing growth, we also put another thing that will keep the person in our kind of control.
One carving too much.
One carving too much, exactly, exactly. And I think it's something that it has a lot of potential, and also like you said, it's there, by the way, in many places. They speak about it, regardless of old, new. There's Zen, Taoism, Kabbalah, all of these things. But I don't think it has to go also to a spiritual level or to religious level. It makes sense, because you said to be in this idea of being in the action and doing only the action. This means that also more than that is already too much.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot over preparing is over preparing.
Yeah.
It's not preparing precisely.
Yeah.
The same is not preparing enough. But and here comes the quality over quantity. And this also goes with the teaching. If I will say 100 things full of quality but they're not relevant, I'm not helping the person, I'm pulling him down. And if I give one thing that is full of quality and gives a lot of potential, it's a different story.
Yeah, it's the classic idea of perfection not arising when there's nothing left to put in, but when there's nothing left to take away.
Beautiful.
And this is, I think it's a very powerful thing especially for guys like me to think about, right? Guys who have a lot of ability to say nice things, right? To recognize when those things are actually the thing that somebody needs to hear.
Well, knowledge is power. And you, for example, my experience from taking a class with you was that you're extremely knowledgeable, and also in aspects that for me felt very relevant. Knowledge about communicating with nature, knowledge about self-defense, knowledge about playing games, and I get that. That's why it's a tricky subject that people think that if you speak about it, you speak about something abstract, because minimalism can be also, for some person it can be saying so many things. For him it will be minimalism, because he still edits from this type of sack of knowledge.
Yeah.
So it's something that needs to be adaptable to the amount of knowledge and the situation.
Absolutely.
But asking what's relevant, this is a good question, I think.
Yeah, it's a powerful question. I wanted to go back to this idea of it. It's not just like a spiritual principle. You can look at it that way, because I think this is interesting how, in a lot of ways, these old mystical, romantic traditions, in a way, we're finding now a resonance with motor learning theory and dynamic systems theory and flow state research. Like, all of this is in a sense, to some degree, there's this consilience between these, which is a big word for knowledge coming together. If we have the best model of how the mind works, right now, we know that the way that it organizes information, it tells us something about how to teach. And the funny thing is that what it tells us about how to teach is not so different from these old principles that are in Zen or in martial arts.
Interesting.
This is something that's very inspirational to me right now to think about, is how much there's lots of tradition that's crap.
Yeah, definitely.
But there's so much that we can learn from it if we are willing to sift and to pay attention.
Look, as a person growing up in Israel, which is a country very, very connected to religion, and it's one of the best demonstrations to show how much tradition and religion can mess up humanity. I completely agree that. I don't think, but by any means, I'm too much romantic about history or nostalgia or even traditions. But I think that there is some truth, for example, in some principles that you can find them in old writings and in new writings alike. That once you're not being cynical about them, they can make so much sense. I heard an interesting interview with Laird Hamilton, which is one of my favorite athletes. So Laird Hamilton, regardless of all of his training and all of the science that he uses, eventually it comes down to a very, very simple relationship with nature.
Yeah.
Very honest one. And this is the minimalism, that eventually, after all is said and done, after all the preparation and all of the, the managing with the world on the scientific level, you come and you're like, okay, what's my relationship with the practice? What's my relationship with the surrounding, with the situation, with the other person? And this is, I think this is very powerful. And this is not something that you can identify as something that is connected to old writings or new writings, or and I think also today not necessarily to Eastern or Western.
Yeah.
It's something a bit more universal.
Yeah, I'm interested in the connection between Eastern, Western, Stoicism, Taoism. It's a beautiful thing to think about, and that to go back to kind of the early part of our conversation, what do you get from your practice, right? The practice can make you one of the best in the world and leave you with zero satisfaction, or you can have an incredibly powerful practice that nobody knows about.
I think for me, the best flips that I did, the best dance moves, the best sparring sessions were the ones who were not filmed, that they had no witnesses, they had no audience. So a great wave that no one ever sees me taking except for myself, I would take on any day. On just being great at something and not satisfied with a lot of credit.
Beautiful. Well, we are about to get rained on. It is thundering and lightning here.
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
Tom,
definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I look forward to future ones.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.